This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today is Sunday, March 17th. This is the second and final day of our two-day Zoom session here at Endless Path Zendo. And so today I'd like to continue with Te-shan's pilgrimage, kind of a trilogy of koans. Today will be the second on Te-shan. Next week will be the third and final one that shows really his pilgrimage through life in terms of becoming a mature human being, and so a really good teacher. So in the last teisho, we looked at the story of Te-shan, that'd be Tokusan in Japanese, profound enlightenment is presented in Gateless Barrier, koan 28, Lungtan blows out the candle. In that case, as you remember from yesterday, he put down his heavy pack of brilliant notes and commentaries on the Diamond Sutra, the one he'd been lugging around for years, and found living truth. Te-shan, of course, was a noted scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and he'd set off with the intention of wiping out those Zen devils in the south of China who insisted, silly them, that there was a teaching beyond words and letters, not based on any particular sutra through which we can awake and realize Buddha in this very life. Then he fell into the dragon pond of Master Lungtan, Ryotan in Japanese, whose name means dragon pond, and drowned, gone, entirely gone. His candle blown out, he awoke to his own self, his face, before his parents were even born, beyond all words and letters, stepping beyond his wonderful notes on the Diamond Sutra, he found the real diamond. But he was still the same old Te-shan, filled with unbounded confidence and surety, and now, fresh off his recent deep realization, he set off to check himself against the noted teachers of his time. Such pilgrimages after realization were part of Zen tradition. The Tang era, when all of this took place, was known as the Golden Age of Zen. Enlightenment was in the air, and Dharma dialogues were unfolding in field, forest, city, and mountain. Zhao Chu famously said, "If I meet a child of 7 who can teach me, I'll learn from them. If I meet someone of 90 who can learn from me, I'll teach them." He was 60 at the time when he set off, and on his pilgrimage, checking out other teachers and being checked by them. His initial realization had been at 19. His full realization at 56. His willingness to be taught by a child or to teach an elder was startling, given the Confucian culture of his time in which respect for elders was at the core. Zhao Chu, that's Joshu in Japanese, his humility was rooted in the deepest selfless realization and a maturely integrated life. Te-shan, on the other hand, was a young man and fresh off the mark when he set off to check out other teachers. So here's the case which presents Te-shan after leaving Lungtan, checking his realization against, well, to quote Allen Ginsberg's Howl, the best minds of his generation. He comes to noted teacher Kwei-shan, that would be Isan in Japanese, temple, and here's what happens. And this is, yesterday's case was in the Gateless Barrier, Wumenkan, or Mumenkan in Japanese. Today's is from Blue Cliff Record, the Hekigenroku in Japanese, or Pianlu in Chinese. In its case 4, Te-shan Carries His Bundles. And as I said, I see this as a trilogy. Yesterday he was carrying his backpack, today he's carrying his bundle, and next Saturday, a week from yesterday, he'll be carrying his bowls. And the three together really make a trilogy revealing someone really maturing through their practice. So the case goes like this. When Te-shan came to Kwe-shan's temple, he carried his pilgrim's bundle with him into the Buddha hall, where he crossed from east to west and from west to east. Kwe-shan sat quietly doing zazen. Looking around, Te-shan said, "Nothing, nothing," and went out. Shwedo, the original compiler of the 100 Cases and original verses, which became the foundation of the Blue Cliff Record, writes or comments on this, completely exposed. Te-shan got to the monastery gate, but then said to himself, "I shouldn't be so crude." So he re-entered the hall in the prescribed manner for the meeting. As Kwe-shan sat there, Te-shan, holding up his kneeling cloth, which is what a monk would have to spread out on the floor, unfold to do their prostrations, said, "Master." Kwe-shan made as if to take up his ceremonial whisk, whereupon Te-shan shouted, "Cuts!" and left with a sweep of his sleeves. Shwedo, that would be secho in Japanese comments, completely exposed. Te-shan, turning his back on the hall, put on his straw sandals and departed. That evening, Kwe-shan asked the head monk, "Where is that newcomer?" The head monk replied, "When he went out, he turned his back on the Buddha hall, put on his straw sandals, and departed." Kwe-shan said, "Hereafter, that fellow will go to the summit of an isolated peak, establish a hermitage, and scold the Buddhas and abuse the patriarchs." Shwedo comments, adding frost to snow. So, today's case insists that we grasp the essence of Te-shan, of where he's coming from, and see into his condition and intention. What's going on? Why does he break with monastic convention when he storms in, looks around, says nothing, nothing, and leaves? When Kwe-shan, a noted teacher, is sitting right there. Is he like Zhao Chu, simply now beyond convention? Is that the point? I have no need now to follow rules. Is that it? Or is there something else going on? Would Zhao Chu have done such a thing? If not, why? What's your take on it? Back in the early 70s, an old Zen friend, Marcy Wilkov, at the Rochester Center, created a brilliant May 1st special edition. April 1st, sorry, that's right. It would be April 1st, Fool's Day. Thank you. April 1st special edition of the Rochester Zen Center's newsletter, which was and still is called, as far as I know, Zenbo. Back then, it was just a mimeoed newsletter, not a magazine, and its byline under the title heading was "The mind of a Zen adept is taut like a drawn bow." Taut, T-A-U-T, like a drawn bow. Our friend created her one-issue joke zine for April Fool's Day with the title Zen Bugle instead of Zen Bow. And under its heading ran the line, "The mind of a Zen adept is blown like a bugle." Perhaps Te-shan at this point in his life's journey might have enjoyed that. The mind of a Zen adept is blown like a bugle. Now, to back up a bit, in our curriculum, the Blue Cliff Record, Hekigan-roku or Pian-ryu, is the second book of koans we will examine after the Gateless Barrier. It is a deeply poetic text, so much so that Dao Wei, the heir of Wan Wu, who created the finished Blue Cliff Record, based on the earlier teacher Shwedo's original, by the way, Wan Wu would be Engo in Japanese, based on the earlier teacher Shwedo's original compilation of 100 koans and verses. Dao Wei, the heir of Wan Wu, burned the printing blocks for the Hekigan-roku. He did this because he felt that Zen students were getting so hooked on the collection's literary beauties that they were failing to grasp its power to awaken and transform. Fortunately, it was later mostly restored from surviving manuscripts. There are some introductions that are missing, otherwise it's pretty complete. Zen Master Dogen was said to have been so impressed with the Blue Cliff record that when he came upon a copy the night before he was to return to Japan from China, he stayed up all night and transcribed the entire text before getting on the boat in the morning. So this essentially Rinzai training document was brought to Japan by the founder of Japan's Soto sect, where it is sometimes known as the one-night Hekigan, in reference to Dogen's respect for it. Given this, why Soto teachers who trace their lineage to Dogen fail to examine koans intimately in their teaching strikes me as a real loss. Though some Soto teachers are turning to koans today, sadly, it is mostly in salon-like gatherings, which are essentially repeats of graduate school seminars, intellectually stimulating but not transformative. Why not? Because it leaves no blood, sweat, or tears on the mat. As far as I know, no current Soto teachers are authorized to offer koan practice in the Doksan room, for none have worked individually with a teacher on the curriculum. Yasutani Roshi, a lay teacher and student of, Yamada Roshi, a lay teacher and student of Yasutani Roshi, offers this history of the Blue Cliff record. And as I mentioned yesterday, the lineage of koan practice that is now most prevalent in the West actually began with Harada Sogaku Roshi, a Soto teacher who went to Doktan Roshi, a Rinzai teacher, to do koan practice, because Kensho was seen as so chimerical and vague in Soto tradition, since in the early 20th century, Kensho was no longer required as a foundation for being a teacher in Soto, because they had a need for so many leaders. Their organization was so huge and they had so many temples. They needed people who were, good people, really understood practice, were ethical, etc. But they took away the requirement for kenshos, and so koan practice was not used at that point in Soto tradition. So the Soto teacher Harada Roshi went to a Rinzai teacher, Doktan Roshi, to do koan practice to really clarify his awakening and mind's eye. And then he later created a hybrid tradition, which is what every koan teacher in the West, except those who are straight Rinzai, comes out of. So it was a very small movement in Japan because it was not pure. It was a combination of Soto and Rinzai. But it has become the backbone. The Harada Yasutani koan line has become the backbone of koan practice today in the West, which is a deeply lay movement rather than a monastic movement, interestingly. In any case, you can read about Yamada Roshi. You can read about his deep realization experience in the Three Pillars of Zen. It is the first enlightenment account there in those listings of enlightenment accounts. And he appears as Mr. KY, a Japanese executive, age 47 at that time. He's now passed away. He was for many years a hospital administrator at the hospital where his wife was head doctor. And he founded a very lay Zendo in Kamakura. So as he was Japanese, he uses the Japanese names when he's speaking about the Blue Cliff record. So here's what he says. The Hekigan Roku contains 100 koans collected by Master Secho. So that would be Shuedo in Chinese. Secho, again, is Japanese. After each case, he added the verse. Master Shuedo, Secho, was born in 980 and died at the age of 72 in 1052. Master Secho is said to have edited the koans and verses of the Hekigan Roku when he was 42 or 43 years old. He belonged to the fourth generation after Master Unmon. Master Unmon had great literary talent, and so did his descendant, Master Secho. It is said that upon beginning as well as after finishing each verse, and this is very touching, Master Setjo, again Shuedo, prostrated himself and burned incense before a Buddha figure. So his poetical creation is nothing but a manifestation of his great faith in the way. Indeed, they are wonderful poems. In fact, Yamada Roshi says, I consider the verses of the Hekigan to be among the greatest literary achievements of human beings. Later, Master Wan Wu, that would be Engo in Japanese, was born in 1063, about 10 years after the death of Master Setjo. He added the instructions to the 100 koans, and then an instruction is like an introduction, a small paragraph before the main case. And in our Dokusan room, and this is traditional in the Harada Yasutani koan lineage, we do not take up the instructions and the verses. We take only the main cases. In addition to the instructions, Master Engo wrote rather extensive commentaries which expound on the main case. They make wonderful reading, and if you are interested, I recommend the Cleary Brothers' full translation of the Hekigan Roku. It's really a wonderful text to read. It's deeply poetic, and the commentaries by these old guys from 1,000 years ago is so current feeling. It's just a great read, and it's something you can just read and savor. He furthermore added sharp and biting comments to each phrase or sentence in the main case. He did the same for the verses of Master Shuedo, giving short comments on each phrase of the verse and lengthy commentaries on the whole verse. These together form what we now know as the Hekigan Roku. So now to the case. What's Te-shan doing? Carrying his bundle means carrying his monk's ritual gear. So when entering the monastery, there's a prescribed ritual to follow. You speak with the attendant monk, request an interview with the teacher. When approaching the teacher, you wear your formal robes. You unfold and set down your bowing cloth and make full prostrations. But Te-shan just marches in, carrying his bundle, and peers around as if he owns the place. Nothing, nothing, he exclaims, and charges off again. What's up with him? And how about Te-shan? How do you see him as Te-shan enters and approaches? Is he aware of him? Is he bothered by him? What's your sense? How about what's his reaction when Te-shan leaves? The koan requires that we see into the essence of both protagonists. Or artists is how we could think of them, for koan interchanges, or mondo, are like jazz. A solo followed by a riff that rises from it and takes off from it, then swings back to the first, then we swing back to the first player, and so on, back and forth, one participant working from and rising off the other. More than a duel, more than a battle, I see it as like a jazz combo of each needing the other to create finer music together. So Te-shan sits there, and this music, in this case, is rather muted. Te-shan sits there as if waiting for something to happen. He just keeps sitting. And when something does happen, there's no visible response from him either. Is he untouched, unmoved, simply responsive? Leave me alone, I'm doing zazen. Is that it? Come what may, nothing will upset or interfere with my time for meditation. Is that what's going on? Then at their second meeting, and why is there a second meeting? What has happened in the interim? He makes a move and starts to raise his fly whisk. A fly whisk is a standard ritual item held by teachers when taking up the teaching seat. It goes back to the first precept, not to kill. The fly whisk brushes insects away without harming them. So it's a symbol of the teacher's commitment, compassion, and authority. Why does he reach for his fly whisk now? And why does Te-shan respond to this slight movement with that loud shout of cuts and then leave? The first time he entered, He carried his bundle in violation of monastic ritual and procedure, looked around, said nothing, nothing, and left. Then he checked himself and returned. Why? Now he starts to take up the proper form for interacting with the teacher, but it goes awry. Why? What short circuits it? What's your sense of what's going on? The action seems to be 99% on his side. All Kuei-shan does is start to raise his fly whisk, and then comes that cuts. What's going on? Has Kuei-shan, the noted teacher, been overwhelmed by this newcomer, outgunned and left in the dust? Here's the background on Kuei-shan, or Isan, as he's known in Japan. And his dates are 771 to 853. And this is from the Transmission of the Lamp, which is a 30-volume, and each volume was very slender, work consisting of putative biographies of the Chan Buddhist and Zen Buddhist ancestors and other prominent Buddhist monks. It was created during the Song dynasty, so that came right after the Tong, when they were looking back at the great teachers who really had established Zen from the perspective of the Song. This, what I'll read, is from a book called Original Teachings of Chan Buddhism, translated by Chang Chung Wan. It was published by Random House in 1969. So here it goes. Chan Master Kuei-shan was a native of Jiangxi, Fuzhou. His original surname was Chao. When he was 15, he left his parents and became a monk. In the Tian-shan monastery in his native town, he studied under the Vinaya, that would be the ethical codes, master Fa Chang, and had his head shaved as a monk. Later, he was ordained and he devoted himself to the study of the sutras and Vinayas of both the Mahayana and the Hinayana. At the age of 23, he traveled to Jiangxi, where he visited Master Po Chang Weihai, very important teacher. As soon as the master saw this visitor, he gave him permission to study in the temple, and thereafter Kuei-shan became Po Chang's leading disciple. One day, Kuei-shan was attending Master Po Chang, who asked him, "Who are you?" "I am Lingyu." "Will you poke the fire and see whether there's some spark or burning charcoal in it?" said Po Chang. Kuei-shan did so and said, "There is no burning charcoal." Master Po Chang rose from his seat. Poking deep into the fire, he extracted a small glowing piece of charcoal, which he showed, holding with tongs, to Kuei-shan. "Is this not fire?" he said. At this, Kuei-shan was awakened. Thereupon he made a profound bow and told Po Chang what had happened. However, Po Chang explained, this is so interesting, it's quite a full explanation. "The method that I used just now was only for this occasion. It is not the usual approach. The sutra says to behold the Buddha nature, one must wait for the right moment and the right conditions. When the time comes, one is awakened as from a dream. It is as if one's memory recalls something long forgotten. It is as if one's memory recalls something long forgotten. One realizes that what is attained is one's own and not from outside oneself. Thus, an ancient patriarch said, after enlightenment, one is still the same as one was before. There is no mind and there is no dharma. One is simply free from unreality and delusion. The mind of the ordinary person is the same as that of the sage, because the original mind that is yours and mine and everyone's right now, is perfect and complete in itself. When you have attained this recognition, hold on to what you have achieved. So that was the quote from Po Chang. During this period, Dutta Suma, which is, he was kind of a character. He may have been kind of fortune teller, physiognomist, or something, came to the monastery to see Master Po-chang. The master asked whether it was possible for him to go to Mount Quay. He wanted to start a monastery there. And this whole thing becomes case 40 in the gateless barrier. We'll get to that. The master asked whether it was possible for him to go to Mount Quay and start a monastery. The Dutta answered that Mount Quay was extremely steep, but that despite this, 1,500 devotees could gather there. However, he said, it would not be a good place for Master Po-chang. And the master asked why. And the physiognomist or phrenologist, who study of shape of heads as character or whatever, fortune teller kind of person, said that Master Po-chang was a gaunt man of ascetic habits, while Quay was a mountain of flesh, warm and sensuous, and that if he should go there, he would expect fewer than 1,000 disciples. Po-chang asked him whether he thought that among his students there might be one suitable to act as abbot on that mountain. And the phrenologist Dutta Suma told him he would like to see all his disciples one by one. So Po-chang called for the head monk. The Dutta ordered him to cough deeply once and pace several steps, and afterward announced that this monk was not qualified for the post. Then he sent for Ling Yu, remember that would be Quayshan, who became Quayshan, as you'll see, who was at that point the business supervisor of the temple. As soon as he saw him, the fortune teller said, "This is the right man to be master of Mount Quay." Now, that same night, Po-chang called Ling Yu to his chamber and told him, "Mount Quay will be a splendid place to carry forth the teaching of our school and to extend enlightenment to the generation to come." Remember, Quayshan is the guy who's sitting there when Te-shan walks in. So this is maybe up on that mountain where he eventually became abbot. When the head monk heard of this decision, he complained about it, pointing out that he was the head monk and deserved the appointment. How could Ling Yu, who became Quayshan, rightfully be appointed abbot of Mount Quay? He had seniority. Po-chang said to him, "If you can make an outstanding response in front of the assembly, you shall receive the appointment." Po-chang then pointed to a pitcher and said to him, "Don't call this a pitcher. What would you call it?" The head monk answered, "It cannot be called a wooden wedge." Some translations, "It can't be called a wooden shoe." Master Po-chang did not accept this and turned to Ling Yu. Remember, that was his earlier name before he was Master Quayshan, demanding his answer. Ling Yu kicked the pitcher and knocked it over. Master Po-chang laughed and said, "Our head monk has lost." Ling Yu subsequently was sent to be abbot of Mount Quay. And this encounter of the head monk and Ling Yu and the water pitcher, it's called kicking over the water pitcher, is Quayshan's first teaching, really. And it is case 40 of the gateless barrier, or Wumenkan in Japanese. So the master, to continue this, here's another little bit from Quayshan's teaching. The master came to the assembly, so this is after he was up on Mount Quay. It's really interesting. He said, "After I have passed away, I shall become a water buffalo at the foot of the mountain. On the left side of the buffalo's chest will appear 5 characters, Quayshan, monk Ling Yu. It'll be inscribed on the buffalo. At that time you may call me the monk of Quayshan, but at the same time I shall also be the water buffalo. When you call me water buffalo, I am also the monk Quayshan. What is my correct name?" What is my correct name? The master propagated, this is still from the transmission of the lamp. The master propagated the teachings of Chan for more than 40 years. Numerous followers achieved self-realization, and 41 disciples penetrated to the final profundity of his teaching. On the 9th day of the first month of the 7th year, 853, of the Tang dynasty. The master washed his face and rinsed his mouth, seated himself, and smiling, passed away. This was 64 years after he was ordained. He was 83 years old. He was buried on Mount Quay, where he had taught. His posthumous name received from the royal court was Great Perfection, and his pagoda was called Purity and Quiescence. So, to get back to the case, in short, Te-shan, who was sitting there doing nothing, was no slouch. Now, why does Shuido, compiler of the 100 Cases of the Blue Cliff Record, respond to both these encounters with completely exposed? What is so clear? And why does he say it not once, but twice? Is there a difference in the two exclamations, completely exposed, or is he himself adding frost to snow? Zen language tends to be colloquial and down to earth. It is hardly, if ever, lavish or rosy. This creative Zen style emerged out of insight as well as from the Chinese character. Zen insight is a matter of seeing what is so simply, what is so simply and clearly. The problem is that language that tries to suggest this living reality that fully exists even before words or thoughts can form becomes so engrossing in itself that it sticks in the mind until we carry those words around entranced by the finger pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. This is why Dawi burned the printing blocks of the Blue Cliff Record. On the whole, Zen language, like much of ancient Chinese poetry, aims at the natural and ordinary. Layman Pong's much-noted verse, perhaps his Enlightenment verse, says simply, "My miraculous power and spiritual activity, carrying water, chopping firewood." My miraculous power and spiritual activity, carrying water, chopping firewood. This is not reductive. Ordinary is not ordinary, but seen properly is fully, miraculously it. Just as things are, wonders abound. Tasting tea, saying good morning, seeing the sunrise, miracles abound. Seeing colors with the eyes, hearing sounds with the ears, thinking thoughts with the brain, digesting an impossible burger and turning it into muscle or thought. Miracles abound. And yet, because we feel cut off, isolated, we fail to see the miracles around us every day and cause ourselves and our world great harm. This we clearly see, and it is why many of us come to practice Zen. Our whole life, when seen profoundly, when we truly awake to form, is only emptiness. Emptiness, only form, and that only is not reductive. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form, is prajna paramita, highest perfect wisdom. Zen words do not aim at building mental clinging or seek to move us toward awe or reverence. Yet, ordinary as it is, Zen language is religious language nonetheless. Like Van Gogh's deeply moving paintings of a broken down old pair of boots. Maybe you know some of Van Gogh's paintings. He painted broken down old shoes and boots. The ordinary is miraculous, just as it is. There is no need to gild a lily or add frost to snow. Ordinary things shine with the unique expression of what they are, just as they are. Layman Pong's verse on chopping wood and carrying firewood as miraculous activity was not sour grapes. At the end of the case, Gui-shan learns that the newcomer, Te-shan, has turned his back on the Buddha hall and departed. Well, why not just say he's gone, or that guy, he left? That would have been a really ordinary way of saying it. So is there a point being made even here? He turned his back on the Buddha hall and left. Gui-shan's eye is clear. He takes it in, just like he did when Te-shan originally walked in and peered around saying, nothing, nothing. Now he responds to this news without affect or surprise, but simply directly and authoritatively. Gui-shan has seen to the core, and so offers a truth that's clear, unvarnished, and pretty complete. His take on Te-shan is this: hereafter, that fellow will go to the summit of an isolated peak, establish a hermitage, and scold the Buddhas and abuse the patriarchs. Is Gui-shan praising Te-shan, prophesying what this lively monk will one day achieve? Or is he criticizing him? Or is he doing both? And why does Shuido call this adding frost to snow? Frost on top of snow certainly seems like icing on the cake. Why, too, does Shuido include this in his koan collection? How does knowing this koan help us mature our own aspiration to benefit all beings? What does it have to do with wisdom and compassion? A koan in the gateless barrier may help. This is case 46, Xishuang. Step forward from the top of the pole. The case is, Master Xishuang said, how do you step forward from the top of a 100-foot pole? Another eminent master of former times said, you who sit on the top of a 100-foot pole, although you have entered the way, it is not yet genuine. Take a step from the top of the pole, and the worlds of the 10 directions are your total body. And the worlds of the 10 directions are your total body. Aitken Roshi, in his book On the Gateless Barrier, in commenting on this koan, writes, the present case is an example of how koans develop. Xishuang revived an old case from Zen literature involving Changsha and his friends. Later, Wu Men included it in the Gateless Barrier. Now, 765, this is Aiken writing this maybe 20 years ago or more, now 765 years after Wu Men, 865 years after Xishuang, and 1,090 years after Changsha, the case as a koan is still vital. Show me how you step from the top of a 100-foot pole. No history is involved, yet history and biography are nonetheless instructive. Changsha and the monk Hui trained together under Nanchuan. Nansen in Japanese, and Changsha would be Chosa in Japanese. In due time, these two brother monks became independent. Changsha became abbot of a large training center, while Hui went to live in a hermitage in the mountains. How is Brother Hui getting along these days? Changsha wondered. He sent a monk to call on him with instructions about what to say. The monk arrived and asked Hui, what about when you had not yet met Nanchuan? Hui sat quietly. The monk asked, what about after you met Nanchuan? Hui said, nothing special. The monk returned to Changsha and told him what had happened. And this is when Changsha said, you who sit on the top of a 100-foot pole, although you have entered the way, it's not yet genuine. Take a step from the top of the pole, and the worlds of the 10 directions are your total body. This story is given in full in the Book of Serenity, but it seems that Xishuang thought this portion would be enough for the purposes of his students. Hui was in the condition of nothing special. He had entered the way. He had realized equality and emptiness where nothing happens. There are no sages, no ordinary people, no animals, trees, deserts, mountains, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Saving others is out of the question. So Changsha said, it's not yet genuine. Shakyamuni, under the Bodhi tree, says Aitken Roshi, was not yet genuine. He was sitting there, enjoying his realization, but meantime, his former disciples were feeling abandoned in the big city. He needed to step out and give them the word. In cases 13 and 28, 28 is where we started last week with Te-shan carrying his backpack. It's known as Lungtan blows out the candle. 13, Te-shan carries his bowls is where we'll end up next Saturday. He said, in cases 13 and 28, I discussed the character of Te-shan, who felt most at home in emptiness. He only popped out to give his students a swat and then hurried back. In fact, Te-shan, as a teacher, this guy that we're investigating, the hothead, was noted for his use of the stick. Linji was noted for his shout. And Te-shan, or Toksan, was noted for hitting with a stick. So he only popped out to give his students a swat, says Aitken Roshi, and then hurried back. But Changsha was a different breed. He had a clear view of the void, of course, but he was a man of the world and made his home there. One of the most beautiful cases, which we'll take up in a couple of weeks, is Changsha goes out for a stroll in the hills in the spring. And it's really about this complete life, that certainly to understand Zen is not about sitting in emptiness, sitting and facing a wall. It's to get out there and live your life out of this awareness of vast emptiness. Nothing to be called holy, that Bodhidharma touted. In any case, to go on, it takes a lot of work, years of practice, of effort, courage, sacrifice, sweat, and tears to get to the top of the pole. That's all our work is right there, to get to the top of the pole, to have everything fall away. The view from the top is expansive, it's vast. But if you mean to be of use and help to others, you can't stay there. You have to step off from the top of the pole. But how do you do that? It's the top. It's one of the difficulties of Zen. We work so hard to realize vast emptiness, to realize Mu. It can kind of make it seem like your ordinary life and the phenomenal world are secondary. So there are a lot of koans that call us to drop that and really get in there and live. Take a step from the top of that pole. But how do you do it? It's the top. There's nowhere to go. What's missing? How do you go beyond the highest peak and truly enter the way, whole and complete as the person you are? What does this even mean, take a step from the top of the pole? And why should you do it? This case says even this highest position is not yet truly genuine. You must take a step from the top of the pole, and then the world of the 10 directions will be your entire body. What is your total body? And how about Te-shan in relation to this? Where is he at? In the parable of Enyodatta, the beautiful maiden who lost and then found her own head, Yasutani Roshi in the Three Pillars of Zen comments, the discovery of our true nature can be compared to Enyodatta's discovery of her head. But what have we discovered? Only that we have never been without it, Nonetheless, we are ecstatic as she was at the finding of her head. She ran around going, "I found my head, I found my head." When the ecstasy recedes, we realize we have acquired nothing extraordinary, and certainly nothing peculiar. Only now, everything is utterly natural. Te-shan, I wonder where he's at in relation to that. What do you think? And Harada Roshi, commenting on the letters of Yaiko Iwasaki, the young girl who realized very deep enlightenment in just a few weeks' time. It's an incredible series of letters, correspondence in the Three Pillars of Zen. Writes in his assessment of what she revealed in her third letter, he writes this: "At this stage, one acquires what is termed the wisdom of subtle and immaculate perception, or subsequently attained wisdom. Now it is possible to perform the benevolent and virtuous acts attributed to Fugen, at Samantabhadra, or Kanon, Avalokiteshvara. In Zen, this is the fulfillment of the vow of a bodhisattva. This is living in the Pure Land. Though it takes from 5 to 10 years after Kensho for most practicers to come to this stage, she has reached it in less than a week. It is doubtless due to her deep and pure faith in Buddhism, to her vast and boundless vow made through countless lives in embracing all sentient beings, and to having listened with a believing heart to every word of authentic Buddhism spoken to her. Her accomplishment is rare in modern times." And then on her seventh letter, he writes, "An ancient Zen saying has it that to become attached to one's own enlightenment is as much a sickness as to exhibit a maddeningly active ego. In fact, or indeed, the profounder the enlightenment, the worse the illness. In her case, I think it would have taken 2 or 3 months for the most obvious symptoms to disappear, 2 or 3 years for the less obvious, and 7 or 8 for the most insidious. Such symptoms are less pronounced in one as gentle as she, but in some they are positively nauseating. Those who practice Zen must guard against them. My own sickness lasted almost 10 years. Ha! So, getting back to Te-shan, will he stay up on his isolated, lonely peak, laughing at Buddhas and abusing patriarchs? That doesn't sound quite right, does it? How does that help? What does genuineness or maturity in practice come down to? Whatever you say, Shui Do might still call out, completely exposed. Last time, in yesterday's teisho, Te-shan carried his pack on his back, lugging it hundreds of miles, sure it contained all that he or the world would ever need in the way of wisdom. At the end of that koan, he burned all his precious notes, saying what he had thought was the great wisdom in the world, added up to no more than a few drops of water thrown into a great ravine. That enlightenment, realization of his own mind, our own mind, is way, way beyond all wise, even the wisest words. In today's koan, having gotten rid of his notes, thrown off all his, to quote Bob Dylan, pointless, useless knowledge, who himself was semi-quoting W.B. Yeats, he carries his sacred monk's bundle hundreds of miles after his enlightenment to Quaishan's monastery. But once there, even his monk's bundle falls away into the vast ravine. He hardly seems to know what to do with it or how to use it. Has it all been in vain? Wu Men's verse to the final koan of the gateless barrier, Kan Feng's one road may point the way. The verse goes like this: Before you take a step, you are already there. Before your tongue has moved, your teisho is finished. Though your every step is ahead of the last, you must remember the vast, all-encompassing crater. Before you take a step, you are already there. We strive so hard to get there. But before you take a step, it's already whole and complete. You're already whole and complete. There's nothing to add to it. Before your tongue has moved, before you say a word, your teisho has long been finished. Though your every step is ahead of the last, you keep progressing. You're doing well in life. Still, remember the vast, all-encompassing crater. It's not just a mention of don't forget you're going to die. That's not what he's saying. Anyway, our third and final koan in this trilogy will take us back to the gateless barrier where we'll see Te-shan again. But now he's an old, mature teacher living at his own temple up on Mount Quay, and we may be in for a surprise. This hothead is quite something in the end. In the final koan, he carries not a backpack of books, not a monk's ritual bundle, but simply his own lunch bowls. And this time, he says nothing. This guy who would mouth off at a moment, he was described, remember the last koan, Lungtan, who blew out his candle, said this guy has teeth like fangs and a mouth like a blood bowl. He's always there for a fight, full of sound and fury. And this time, in this last koan of Te-shan, which we'll see next week, he says nothing, not a word. And yet, great teaching emerges and, well, we'll see then. We'll stop here and recite together our great vows for all